Hi, everyone. My name is Leanna Biddle. I'm your Career Education Manager through the Warner College, she, her pronouns. So today we'll be talking about developing your resume and CV, especially thinking about the Pulliam Scholars Program. And so what you're currently involved with, how can you think about your experiences as you prepare to apply for different jobs and internships? So I'm hoping to keep this pretty short, maybe 15 to 20 minutes. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I also wanted to provide some resources for you as you think about how you can best prepare with your resume and potentially a CV if that's what you're developing. So I'm going to jump on in. Let's see. Perfect. So what I wanted to start you all with is thinking about essentially where you're at. Right, so thinking about your current education, presently your current role at CSU, what major are you pursuing, thinking futuristically, it's grad school, an option for you, and how does that look like moving forward? Why did you choose your major? So some of you may be HTNR, ESS, FRS, whatever major that looks like, and so why did you choose that major specifically? And what skills or experiences are you still hoping to gain? And so thinking about the skill set you've developed and thinking about potentially those certifications that might interest you as you move forward and that might lead you to a job that is what you're looking for essentially. Your future. So thinking futuristically, thinking about you, who you are currently and presently, but also futuristically is what interested you in the Pulliam Scholars Program. And so what about it enticed you? Maybe it was the outreach, working with youth, potentially working with your peers. What about it enticed you? What job titles stand out to you? So as you're thinking about different jobs that might interest you, what titles are you seeing potentially in the NRCC newsletter that I'm sending out, potentially as you go through Google Jobs, any different search engine, what titles resonate with you? So it's great to keep a list of what those titles are so that you can start to decide moving forward what jobs interest you most. Will you need additional training or an advanced degree? So thinking about certifications, potentially a master's degree, potentially a PhD. Again, everyone has a different trajectory in terms of what they're hoping to do job-wise, and it's good to start thinking about what are some of those different trainings or certifications or degrees that might help you as you move forward. And lastly, who are your potential employers? So it's good to start thinking about organizations that interest you, employers who you've interacted with or are hoping to interact with, and start creating that list so you have a better idea of who you'll be engaging with as you move forward. So as you think about the job search, as you think about building your resume, these are all great things to think about so that you feel most prepared as you move forward. Resume overview. So we're going to dive right on in. Again, this presentation will be tailored towards you and especially the Pulliam Scholars Program and how you can successfully articulate your experience as a Pulliam Scholar. But I did want to provide a quick overview that might be helpful. So develop a master resume and target resume. And so for those of you who have interacted with me in past, you may have heard this philosophy, if you will. A master resume is everything you've done. It could be a one-day volunteer experience. It could be all of your relevant coursework. This is essentially for your own eyes. It's a full resume minus 7 pages. And so again, it's everything that you've done. As you start to look at different jobs that interest you, you'll develop target resumes. And so target resumes are specified towards those jobs, right? It may have keywords from the job announcement. It may be highlighting towards the top of your resume, again, those experiences that resonate or more closely relate to the job itself. So good to think about. For those of you interested in federal opportunities, a master resume could also be a federal resume, right? Master's where you're putting all that information in there. So it could work in both ways. And if you are interested in federal, let's talk about a federal resume specifically. We can have a one-on-one individualized appointment, which might be helpful moving forward. Create your resume as a Word document and avoid templates. So templates are hard to move. So for example, if you used Word doc and used a template, you may have a hard time changing the spacing. And so if that's the case, I actually have a Word doc that I created that I can send to you. Essentially, it has the different sections, so you can put in that important information, but you'll be able to maneuver some of the spacing, some of the font sizing, essentially create the resume to what you want it to be. And so always good to think about. I would hate for you to have your resume done and be stuck at a page and an eighth and not be able to move it up to a page because of that template format. So if the case, let's chat. Describe employer relevant duties or responsibilities. Again, the target resume, thinking about what the employer or organization wants and how are you tailoring that essentially to the job itself, right? How are you, to your resume, how are you making that connection specifically? And of course, I'll talk about this in the next slide, but include jobs, internships, research, volunteer opportunities, all of the above, so that you're including the most relevant information. Designing your resume. And so I have two columns, essential sections and additional sections. So we have the header as an essential, of course, that has your name, that has your phone number, email, potentially your address. You don't have to include your direct address. I always recommend city and state, especially if applying to a job within that state. Education, so I typically see that towards the top. It is dependent on the individual and if they would rather have their work experience above it, but especially with your specific degree and being in the Warner College, it might be good to have education at the forefront at the very top. Professional experience, and so jobs, internships, research, projects, other relevant experience, volunteer experience, right? It's still gaining experiential learning skills. So I would definitely include it within your resume. Additional sections, a professional profile or summary. So this typically goes towards the top under your header and above education. So essentially this is a space where you can talk about your different experiences in a quick way. So for example, gain skills in collaboration as a Pulliam scholar at Colorado State University. Right, so that could be something you put under your professional profile. With that, employers will then see that bullet point and look down within your resume to learn more about your experience. And so again, it's those, it could be a certification you want to include, it could be a related experience, could be really anything that grabs the employer's attention. So it's optional, but it could be good to include, especially if you're intentional with your resume and wanting to apply to a specific position and including those experiences in there. Relevant coursework, so again, putting that in your master resume especially. If you feel like for the job you're applying to, you don't have a ton of professional experience or experiential learning, if you will, you could include relevant coursework. And so that still constitutes learning within the classroom, which is applicable. And so you could put relevant coursework. Leadership and skills, that could be extracurricular involvements on campus. That could be anything off campus, skills, that could even be technical skills that you write out. So it could be those certifications, additional skills that you've gained over time, especially as they relate to the job. Honors and awards, professional associations, so that shows longevity in the field. So again, that could be something you include on your resume, especially master. Conference experience and presentation experience, which shows could be communication, collaboration, public speaking, a whole bunch. And those could be even academic focused. And so these are just a few sections that pop up that might be good to have on your resume. If you feel like you don't have all of these sections or something for each of these sections, that's okay. What I would do is put it under your master resume so that you have these sections in there and you can fill in information as needed. Target, again, you can be more specific about what information is going in there. Okay, aesthetics. So I always like to include this just so that you have an idea of how you can format your resume. And so when designing, some things to be aware of, I always like to use the example of a page and an eighth. So if you're stuck at a page and an eighth and want to get to a page, these are some of the different things that you can do to change and shift essentially the formatting within your resume. So narrow margins. So typically when you start a Word doc, I'll say, right, you'll have kind of the original layout, original margins. So if you click narrow, it'll bring everything out perfectly within the page. And so again, that will shift everything up because it's spreading everything out on that first page. Font size, typically, some of the sizes that I like more is 10 point to 11 point font. 9 point font is too small, it's hard to see. 12 point can feel a bit large, and so I think 11 is a good range there, maybe 10.5. Font color consistent throughout. So this is solely based off of industry, right? So if you have a friend or peer who is majoring in art, you may see a more aesthetically pleasing, colorful resume with different sort of format. Within natural resource, what I see more often is black font ink as you go through. It's consistent. You don't have to worry about the color looking weird if it's a black and white printer. Again, it's more of what I see industry-wise, and I also want to acknowledge that everyone's resume is their own. So some creative ways to help your resume stand out, if you will, is potentially the line underneath the section, making that colorful, essentially. Adding color to it under your header if there's a line, adding some color to that as well. I've also heard of individuals making that color connected to the organization's color, right? So if they have a certain color palette that they use within the organization or job, you could do that as well, and employers get a kick out of that. And so that's an option for you. Organization, most recent down, so reverse chronological order. So the most recent experience you have proceeding down. Spacing, and so I always like to highlight this right here, this white space right here. This is what I'm talking about with templates, right? So when you have a template, you almost feel like your text is frozen and you can't move the spacing. And so what you can do is, if you are, again, at a page and an eighth, you could make this spacing right here a little bit smaller. So I would say, typically this spacing is as large as the font. So this spacing could be 5/8 size font, and that will move everything up and shift it up, especially if you did it here and here and here and here, right? And so you'll see a significant shift, which is great, especially as you're trying to condense your pages for your resume, make it a bit shorter, maybe that page, 2 pages, whatever the length may be. In the last note, I always like to include this, but it's not the end of the world, if you will. Make sure your sections are properly separated. That includes breaking it in between the 2 pages. And so you have a clean break. Maybe you have 6 bullet points. As it's getting to the bottom of the first page, 3 bullet points, 3 bullet points on the next side, so you have 6. So it shows that you're still continuing with describing that relevant experience. Or if you can, bring it up so that the position, the experience itself is not cut off. You could also include continued on to next page if needed. So that's an option for you moving forward as well. All right, so as we think about the Pulliam Scholars Program, what I first want you to do is think about your resume, think about what's already in there, and what does your resume say about you? And so when I did this last spring or fall with the Pulliam Scholars Group, what I found is that students who were looking through their resume often found, especially if interested in environmental education, that their resume did not scream environmental ed or working with kids or outreach, whatever that may be. So it's good to look at your resume and actually see, what does it say about you? So some quick reflection, maybe 2 minutes, just to see what that looks like. I also asked the group, what is the Pulliam Scholars Program? And was able to pull some of those different responsibilities that you all have, which I will share here. Perfect. So some things that in hearing from the group and things that I picked up from just knowing the program as well. Environmental education, so the history and theory of it. Learning best practices of environmental education, right? So is it age appropriate? Gaining hands-on experience. Collaboration could also be with the above outreach. Instruction and teaching in the outdoors. Risk management, learning flexibility and adaptability. There we go. Developing lesson plans, adapting to state standards, mentorship, working with all ages, and academic coursework and peer-to-peer learning. So again, as you're thinking about the program, and if you're stuck, if you're wondering, what do I put as bullet points for this role? What do I title this role? What do I include information-wise? This could be a good starting point where you're starting to think about, okay, so what is the program itself and what do I do within the program? Another thing to reflect on is, what have you gotten out of it? What are some of those accomplishments, the tangibles that you want to include potentially in an interview? Potentially as you think about your resume and how you're describing the position, what have you gotten out of it and what do you want to take with you as you move forward and start applying to different jobs and interviewing for different roles? Here's an example. And so again, thinking about the job you're applying to, what are your goals? That's what you will include within the bullet points. And so for the experience, this is how it could look section-wise. So I like to include, with the different sections that I included prior, The beautiful part of professional experience or work experience is that you can actually change that section title. And so if you are interested in environmental education, I would highly recommend having an environmental education experience section and putting it towards the top, because the employer will see that, and they'll be able to see the connection with the job itself. One question, I believe is on the next slide too, the questions that you all sent to Kristen, is what do you title yourself in this role? And that can be tricky, but one title that came up that we talked about last fall, I believe it was, is scholar and student. You know, I realized that being in the Pulliam Scholars Program, it's a weird combination of coursework, work, a whole combo of things. And so scholar and student is what we came up with together. We also included the Scholars Program, right? And so the DR and Ginny Pulliam Scholars Program, where, so Colorado State University, Fort Collins, Colorado, when you worked in that program. And so at the time it was August 2018 to present. And so if it is a year long, it'll be to May 2020 for you all. And again, thinking about what jobs are you applying to, what are your goals, and how can you shift the bullet points to match that as well. So I do have an example for you all down below. So some bullet points we came up with last fall was participate in and learn about best practices in environmental education, history, and theory with 12 peers in a year-long program. So what I like about that is the quantitative piece. So the 12 peers, you know, how many people you're working with, how long is the program, and what did the program focus on? Next bullet point, gains hands-on experience working with youth, ages 8 to 18, and develop lesson plans focusing on. So again, you're elaborating. What were the lesson plans focusing on? So again, you're painting a picture for the employer who's looking at your resume. Collaborate with the school district. So again, being specific, who did you connect with to further engage in blank? So again, painting a picture so that the employer knows exactly what you did within this role. Develop leadership skills, including communication and adaptability, in mentoring one high school student for a semester with the goal of blank. So what you'll see as you're looking through these bullet points is that there's a lot of information. It really paints a picture for what you all have done within the role, and that's going to be most important. So if you find yourself looking at the bullet point section and think, I get it, I think I know what I did, what I would do is share it with Kristen, share it with a peer, someone who could then say, well, what about this? Could you add a number here? Could you add more description here so that someone better understands what you did within that role? That will be huge as you move forward. I would say master resume, include all the information that you can. So really think deeply about the role, all the different skills that you've developed. And as you think about developing target resumes, you can be strategic in thinking about what bullet points more resonate with the job itself. So all good to think about. All right, so I wanted to include some of these different questions. So Kristen did collect these questions, and there's a whole bunch. I have more on a Word doc that I'm going to send you all, but I did want to include some of the questions that more relate to resume. So I'm hoping to answer them here. Hopefully this will be helpful, and if not, please feel free to contact me afterwards and we can have a conversation if you have any more questions about resume development. So what term should we use when describing our role in the Pulliam program? So that I brought that up in past, scholar and student is something we came up with and that worked out well. I believe I saw some different answers around environmental educator. You could include that, and what might be good is your supervisor, who I believe is Kristen or Nicole. You can connect with them and just touch base on what title you're hoping to use, right? Because that reference, that recommendation will be most important as you think about title. And just communicating that moving forward. What about the Pulliam program should we highlight on resumes? And so I included that a little bit on the past slide, right? What are some of the different aspects of the program itself, and what are some of the bullet points that you can include? So feel free to go back and refer to that in terms of what to highlight on your resume. Also to that point, thinking about, again, your career goal. What do you want to do? And what are some of the different aspects of the program that you want to highlight as it relates to your goal moving forward? What is the best way to describe the Pulliam program in a sentence or two for a resume? So again, if you go back a few slides, you'll be able to see, and I'll also send you all the slides, and so you may not have to go back in the video, but that is going to be a good way of describing the Pulliam program. What stands out the most on a resume interview? What makes you memorable? That's a great question. What employers say most is taking the time to tailor your resume, and when interviewing, looking at the organization and having knowledge about the organization. And so to your resume, right, I talked about having specific section titles. And so with creating section titles, again, if you're interested in environmental education and if you are applying to an interpretive role, right, having a section titled Interpretation and Environmental Education Experience. An employer is going to look at that section first and foremost because it relates to the job. And so the best piece of advice that I received from actually a federal employer was put all of the most important information on the first page, which I think is true for all jobs, right? You want to put the most relevant experience, academics, education, whatever it may be on the first page so that it grabs the employer. And so that's important to think about as you're developing your resume. Again, for an interview, it's thinking about the organization. You know, you might get the question, to be candid, tell us a little bit about yourself and what about the organization do you like? Why did you apply to this position? And the worst feeling is when you don't have an answer to that because you haven't done research. And so with tying in nuggets of information that relate to the job itself and the organization, that will resonate, excuse me, with employers. So always good to think about and prepare for interviews in that way. Under what subtitle on my resume would I put this experience? That's up to you. Again, section title can change. You could put it under leadership experience. You could put it under coursework. You could put it under job experience. It's really up to you. Again, thinking about what is your career goal moving forward and where does that fit? With those section titles that are more specific, that don't focus on work specifically or volunteer, you can actually put a whole plethora of experiences under that section. So for example, environmental education experience could be the Pulliam Scholars Program. It could be if you work for the Environmental Learning Center. It could be a volunteer experience. And you can put those three under there because, right, it's focusing on environmental ed. And so all good things to think about. What keywords would help describe this experience effectively? So we talked a little bit about that. Keywords coming to mind, just off the top of my head skill-wise, communication, outreach, collaboration, public speaking. Those are just four, but there's a number of different action verbs, different words, key skills, keywords. And so I would go back and look and see what some of the examples look like. Can we list this as a job? If so, what should we call it? So we talked a little bit about that. Let's see, my title, environmental educator. What would you suggest calling this position? So again, student and scholar, could be environmental educator, but it's good just to think about what have you done within the role, what will resonate most with employers, and making sure you communicate that title to your supervisor. In case, again, they get a reference call, the employer who's calling names the position title, that there's some connectedness there. So all great questions. Let's see, I believe that is the end. Perfect. So if you have any questions, I hope that was helpful. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm still hosting appointments. And so if you do want to make an appointment, go to WCNR Career Services. There you can make the appointment. And we can meet and talk more about this experience, your job search moving forward, and any additional questions that you have. Feel free to also email me, it's right here, so that you, again, can ask questions if you'd rather not meet and you'd just like to talk virtually. That works as well. But I appreciate our time together, and I'm here to support you. Thanks.